What really happens behind Queen Elizabeth's reign? For more than 2 decades, a royal guard lived within the walls of one of the most iconic places in the world. He has witnessed events that defy logic, that are dark, and has heard whispers of mysteries that no one should know about. Now, for the first time, he breaks his silence to reveal what he saw. Stories of macabre rituals, underground corridors, and an ancient pact that hides the true nature of the monarchy. This isn't just another conspiracy theory. It's the account of someone who has lived through the horrors hidden in the heart of the United Kingdom. Are you prepared to discover the truth? His story begins as follows. My name doesn't matter. The important thing is what I'm going to tell you now. Today, I want to share something that took me a long time to gather enough courage. My name is irrelevant now, but my story can change the way you see the world. For decades, Queen Elizabeth was the symbol of stability and tradition, a figure who seemed almost divine in her impeccable posture and calm leadership. But I know things that completely changed this image. I served as a guard at Buckingham Palace for over 20 years. It's a position of honor, they say. Silence and discipline are the most important rules for those who wear the uniform. I believed in these rules, and for a long time I followed each one of them fervently, until some things started to make no sense. What you know about the Queen is only a small fraction of the story. She was an icon, admired around the world, but the real Elizabeth, the figure I saw up close, literally very close, hid something terrible. Something that is not spoken about, something that can only be discovered in silence, through small fragments that escape due to carelessness. At first, everything seemed like a dream come true. A boy from a small town in England, like me, growing up with an admiration for the royal guards, motionless, watchful men who seemed to be part of the palace itself. They represented more than just security. They were symbols of honor and duty. I wanted to be one of them, and when I was finally accepted, my family was filled with pride. But the pride was short-lived. From the first days at the palace, I noticed something strange. It was as if the place had a life of its own. I'm not talking about its beauty or grandeur. That's visible to everyone. It was something more subtle, almost invisible, a heavy atmosphere that hovered in the corridors and in the eyes of those who had been there for decades. Veterans warned me, don't ask questions, just do your duty. At first, I thought it was just typical behavior of time-hardened military men. But the stories that circulated during moments of rest intrigued me. Forbidden areas, doors that should never be opened, noises that no one explained. Curiosity here kills, they said. I laughed at it at first, but soon realized that silence was more than a rule of etiquette. It was almost a law within the palace. Even in moments of relaxation, the guards avoided certain topics. When a newcomer, like me, dared to ask about the restricted areas or rumors of strange events, the more experienced ones changed the subject with a look that said more than words. They were trying to protect us, but not from something trivial like a reprimand. It was something bigger, and as the months passed, I began to realize why. Little details accumulated. Doors that were locked one day and unlocked the next. Hallways where the air seemed colder, scared looks from fellow veterans. I couldn't explain it, but something didn't feel right. That's how it all started. The palace is not just the symbol of the British monarchy. He keeps secrets that no one should know. When I joined the Royal Guard, everything seemed like a dream. I remember the first time I put on the uniform. The weight of tradition, the responsibility, the feeling of being part of something bigger than myself. However, as soon as I set foot in Buckingham Palace, I realized that something was out of place. In the beginning, everything was routine. The training was rigorous, the rules were clear, and the discipline was absolute. Patrolling the grand halls, being close to historical figures, and seeing the Queen occasionally strolling with her immaculate posture was a privilege few had. But from my first month onwards, I started hearing stories whispered by the older guards. The veiled warnings. Do not go beyond what is asked of you. This was a phrase I heard constantly. It didn't matter if it was a mysterious door or a noise that broke the absolute silence of the night. The answers were always the same. Forget what you saw. At first, I thought they were just superstitions, something to keep newbies in line. But over time, I realized that these men weren't kidding. There was genuine fear in his eyes. On one of my first night shifts, I patrolled a seemingly ordinary hallway. It was a path I took every day, but that night, something changed. I heard a strange sound, a muffled murmur coming from a restricted area. When I asked a fellow veteran about this, he just shook his head and said, "You don't want to know. Just make your rounds and forget about it." But how to forget? My instinct was to investigate, but my discipline said to follow orders. Still, each night felt heavier, as if the palace had its own eyes, watching everything. The first vision of the inexplicable. It was during a night patrol that something truly disturbing happened. As I walked towards one of the oldest wings of the palace, I saw a group of men dressed in black entering through a side door. They carried large metal boxes, each marked with strange symbols that I had never seen before. They weren't letters or numbers, but something more primitive. The sound coming from the speakers was what bothered me most. A low, constant hum that seemed to vibrate the air around it. It was not something that could be ignored. I asked a more experienced colleague what those boxes were, but his answer was the same as always. Don't ask. Forget what you saw. But how can you forget something so strange? I spent weeks obsessing over those boxes. I began to notice patterns. They were always transported at night, always by the same people, and always to areas of the palace where we, ordinary guards, were not allowed to enter. The forbidden corridor. It was during one of these nights that I came across something that changed everything. A door that should always be locked was open. It was an area of the palace where few ventured, even during the day. Night after night that door remained closed, but that night the pale light escaped through the crack. My heart raced. Part of me wanted to follow orders, pretend I hadn't seen anything, but something pushed me forward. Breathing heavily and my senses alert, I slowly opened the door. On the other side, there was a stone staircase that led down into a dark, cold hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last, and the air there was different. Damp, cold, and with a metallic smell that seemed to stick in your throat. When I reached the bottom, I found myself in a long hallway, lit only by flickering lamps. The walls were made of a dark material that reflected the light strangely, as if they were wet, the secrets of the underground. Along the corridor, there were several metal doors, all with small glass windows. I didn't have the courage to look through them. Every part of my instinct screamed to get out of there, but my curiosity kept me in place. That's when I heard a metallic sound in the distance, something like chains dragging across the floor. I kept walking, trying to ignore my growing fear. At the end of the corridor, I found a door that was different from the others. It was larger, with reinforced hinges and an electronic panel on the side. Against all my best intentions, I turned the doorknob. To my surprise, it was unlocked. On the other side, I found something I can't forget. A cold room with metal walls and shelves full of translucent packages. When I approached one of the packages, what I saw made me almost fall backwards. Inside it, there was perfectly cut human flesh, almost surgically cut. But the worst part was the labels. Each package had a name, and I recognized many of them. They were missing journalists, activists who had criticized the monarchy, people who the world thought had simply disappeared. I left that cold room in shock. Every step down the hallway felt like a monumental effort, as if the air itself was conspiring to trap me there. But even as I fled, something inside me knew this wasn't the end, just the beginning of something even darker. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But the palace didn't allow us to forget. He seemed alive, attentive to the thoughts and intentions of those who dared to question them. It was impossible to ignore the weight of that place, the air charged with something invisible but undeniable. Discovery in the silent night. Shortly after my foray into the cold room, something even more disturbing happened. During one of the night patrols, I walked through a corridor near the royal apartments, one of the most restricted areas in the palace. It was an area that always seemed unusually quiet, even compared to the rest of the place. It was then that I saw the door. It was ajar, which was absurd in itself, as that door should never be open, not even to the guards. My heart raced. Every fiber of my being told me to keep walking, but my curiosity was stronger. I approached slowly and peeked through the crack. Inside the room, I saw something that I will never forget. Queen Elizabeth was there, but not in the way the world knew her. In front of a large mirror, she removed something that looked like her own skin. It wasn't a change of clothes. It was as if she was peeling off an outer layer that wasn't part of her. Beneath the falling human skin, I saw something that left me transfixed. His true form. Its skin was scaly, a bright green, reflecting the light in an almost supernatural way. His eyes, free from the human mask, were yellow, with vertical pupils like those of a snake. For a moment she stood still, as if adjusting to her true appearance. Then he turned his head slowly, as if he had sensed my presence. Even with the door between us, I felt those reptilian eyes cut through the darkness and fix themselves on me. My body froze. I could barely breathe. The macabre ritual, I managed to escape that night, but my torment was far from over. A few days later, while on patrol in another part of the palace, I heard voices coming from an underground corridor. They weren't normal voices. They had a guttural, almost animalistic tone, reciting something in a language I didn't recognize. I followed the sound, my curiosity once again overriding common sense. I arrived at a large room, lit by candles arranged in intricate patterns on the floor. In the center, there was a stone table where a man was tied up. He was alive, but completely still, his eyes wide with pure terror. Around the table, I saw figures I recognized immediately, members of the royal family. But, like the Queen the other night, they were not in their human forms. Each revealed their true reptilian appearance. Scaly skin, glowing eyes, sharp fangs. They recited chants while one of them, who appeared to be the Queen herself, held a shiny object. With one precise movement, she completed the sacrifice. The man's scream was abruptly silenced, and the room was plunged into an even more oppressive silence. What happened next left me paralyzed. The reptilians began to consume the man's body. It wasn't an ordinary meal, but something ritualistic, loaded with meaning that I couldn't understand. Each bite felt like an act of power, a cycle of energy they were feeding. The puzzle pieces. That night, things started to fall into place. The rumors, the forbidden areas, the metal boxes, the cold room. It all made sense now. What I had witnessed was much more than a conspiracy or a dark secret. It was a pact. I discovered later in hidden documents I found elsewhere underground that ritual was part of an ancient agreement. A pact between the reptilians and forces beyond human understanding, which granted them power, influence, and longevity in exchange for human sacrifices. The names on the meat packages, the experiments in the laboratories, the rituals. It was all part of a cycle carefully maintained over the centuries. The monarchy was not just an institution, it was a veil that hid something much more sinister: the predator's gaze. Over the next few days, every time I saw the Queen or other members of the royal family, I felt a chill run down my spine. Their impeccable smiles, their serene postures, it all seemed like a mask, a meticulously crafted disguise to hide what they really were. They knew that I knew. They didn't say anything, but I could feel it. Every glance they cast my way seemed to carry a silent warning. You've seen too much. After witnessing the ritual, my worldview changed forever. Every time I put on my uniform and walked through the halls of Buckingham Palace, I felt the weight of what I had discovered. I wasn't just patrolling a historic building, it was circulating among predators who wore human masks. The crushing silence. My first reaction was to try to continue as if nothing had happened. I knew that any mistake, any wrong gesture or word could be my sentence. The discipline I had learned during training now served to hide my fear. Each day was an internal battle to maintain my composure while my insides were in shambles. The veterans noticed something about me. I could see it in his eyes. One of them, Thomas, approached me one night. He was one of the oldest and most respected guards, a man who wore a perpetually tired expression. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked bluntly. I tried to deny it, but my gaze betrayed me. He sighed and said something I've never forgotten. "I've seen that look before. Don't try to understand, and above all, don't talk about it. Those who speak disappear." The constant paranoia. Thomas wasn't wrong. Over the next few months, I heard stories about guards who had been suddenly reassigned. None of them were mentioned again. It was as if they had never existed. Each disappearance increased my paranoia. I stopped asking questions, avoided specific hallways, and most of all, I avoided making eye contact with members of the royal family. Even so, the feeling that they were watching me was constant. No matter where I was in the palace, it always felt like an invisible shadow followed me. At night, nightmares took over. I relived the cold room, the packages with names, the ritual, and the screams of the sacrificed man. I woke up covered in sweat, my heart beating like a drum. Even when the palace was quiet, I heard the reptilian chants echoing in my mind. The hidden documents. On one of the rare times I had the courage to explore the palace's underground, I found a locked room with the door poorly fitted. Inside were files and diagrams that looked decades, maybe centuries old. The documents confirmed what I already feared. The palace was not just the home of the royal family. It was a power nucleus for a global network. There were maps of important cities with marks in strategic locations. London, New York, Tokyo. It was like a chessboard, and each piece represented an influential figure controlled or eliminated by the reptilians. One name in particular caught my attention: Council of the Ancients. The documents referred to this organization as an entity that supervised the rituals and kept the pact active. It was a power structure much larger than the palace itself. The monarchy was just the tip of the iceberg, the sacrifice of normality. As the years went by, my mental health began to deteriorate. It wasn't just fear, it was the weight of knowledge. Knowing that something so monstrous existed and that I was unable to do anything about it ate away at my soul. When I finally retired in 2003, I swore to myself that I would never talk about what I saw. I spent years trying to forget, convincing myself that maybe I had imagined it all, but even far from the palace, the past followed me. The death of the Queen. When the news of Queen Elizabeth's death arrived in 2022, I felt a mix of relief and terror. On the one hand, I thought maybe the cycle was over. On the other hand, he knew that the monarchy was just one aspect of that organization. I watched the funeral carefully, and what I saw confirmed my worst fears. Gestures, symbols, even speeches had a ritualistic resonance. It was as if they were reaffirming the pact before the world, but in such a subtle way that no one other than those who knew the truth could notice. The decision to speak. It was at that moment that I realized I could no longer remain silent. Writing these words is the most dangerous thing I have ever done, but the world needs to know. You need to understand that the monarchy is not what it appears to be. Now that I have written these words, I know that my life will never be the same. The weight of everything I saw and experienced at Buckingham Palace has haunted me for years, but silence is no longer an option. The true nature of the monarchy, Queen Elizabeth and the royal family, have always been presented to the world as symbols of stability, tradition, and continuity. But what I discovered exposes a terrifying reality. They are not human. The reptilians hiding behind the human appearances of the monarchy not only rule the United Kingdom, but have a global network that influences events, crises, and political decisions. They are kept in power through shadowy pacts, where human lives are the price. The pact and rituals. The rituals I witnessed were not mere isolated aberrations. They are part of a carefully structured cycle to guarantee the power and longevity of this reptilian elite. Every sacrifice, every disappearance, every hidden detail in Buckingham Palace reinforces a pact that spans centuries. I don't know how far this goes, but I know that Queen Elizabeth's death was not the end. It was just a transition for the cycle to continue with the new king. They don't just govern with policies and alliances, they govern with fear, silence, and ancestral power. A warning to the world: my greatest fear is not being found and silenced by those who control this shadowy structure. My biggest fear is that even with my testimony, people will continue to ignore it. The truth is, this isn't just a story about the British monarchy. It's about how power can hide in plain sight, disguised as tradition, while manipulating everything around us. A final appeal. If you've made it this far, I implore you, don't ignore what I just shared. Observe the signs, question the official narratives, and above all, do not fall into the comfort of accepting appearances as true. What sustains these beings is not just the pact, but our ignorance and submission. By telling this story, I know I could be putting my life at risk. But at the same time, I feel like it's my duty to warn the world. Don't let the shine of the crown fool you. Behind it, there is something much darker and more dangerous than you can imagine, finishing. And so, I end this journey through the hidden side of Buckingham Palace. Thank you for following me here. If you like this story and want to hear more scary stories, leave a like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Each interaction helps us bring you more intriguing and mysterious content. Also, leave your comment. What do you think about everything you heard? Share this video with anyone you know loves dark stories, and we'll see you next time. Until then, be careful what you decide to see and know. Some doors should never be opened.